So folks, let's jump into our next session. It's a panel that we are looking at. Sovereignty. It used to be about land. Today, it's about layers. The stacks you control, the talent that you help grow, the systems you run and evolve on your own terms. And in an AI-first world, sovereignty definitely is becoming an architectural choice. So let's dive straight into what that really means. First, please let's welcome onto our stage, he's a pioneering AI scientist and serial Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He co-founded Sentient Technologies and is a primary inventor of the agent-oriented technology that then inspired Siri. Ladies and gentlemen, please let's welcome Chief AI Officer of Cognizant, Babak Hodjat. Put your hands together as he come and joins us. And joining him is Abhishek Operwal, founder at Socket Labs, a research-driven AI lab that is focused on ethical artificial general intelligence. Thank you. And guiding this conversation, we're absolutely delighted because we have our very own Sangeeta Gupta, SVP Strategy, right here at Nasscom. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Babak and Abhishek, for joining this session. And thank you for everybody who's chosen to stay back and attend this session in a post-lunch environment. So really appreciate your participation. I think the whole theme of technology sovereignty has become very, very critical. If any of you were at the AI Summit or tracking all the videos from last week, you would have heard the word sovereignty getting discussed again and again. And I think even today when we are sitting in a room and asking a conversation on what does sovereignty really mean, I think you get very, very different answers. And I think today my panel has two very different speakers. Babak, who leads enterprise AI at Cognizant, and Abhishek, who's building out one of India's sovereign AI models. And I think just a second on Abhishek, Socket Labs that Abhishek runs and has co-founded, is actually one of the sovereign AI companies, one of the LLMs that the Indian government is helping support. And they've had some phenomenal launches at the last week's summit. And I'll let Abhishek cover a little bit about what they are building out and how that could be potentially a important element in many of your AI strategies. So our session today is really going to look at defining what does sovereignty really mean. It's still an open term. It still means very different things to different people, but really trying to see across the AI stack, where are companies looking at it, what are kind of practices they are doing, how do they think about technology sovereignty from a technology lens, from an operational lens, from a data and AI lens, from a talent lens. So we'll keep it conversational, but love to see if we have time and can do a couple of questions also. So Babak, if I can start with you, just what's your top of mind definition of technology sovereignty?
Well, when it comes to enterprises, there's, of course, data sovereignty. Data security becomes really, really important. We live in a world where AI is fueled by large language models, and the most powerful are commercial large language models that are hosted. So if your data, every time you have a query to an agent within your enterprise, it's actually going all the way up to the cloud somewhere. For some enterprises, that's not acceptable. And so that's on the data side. But what really makes an enterprise unique is not just the data. It is the API layer, the processing, the organizational structure, what makes the business unique. And so there are places within an enterprise where, making sure that the processes as a whole, the agentification of them, and the data resides and is processed in a secure manner within the enterprise itself becomes important. It's not always about training an LLM from scratch, although fine-tuning LLMs behind these agents is also a source of, quote-unquote sovereignty in a loosely based definition.
Sovereignty and specialization is a little intertwined. Abhishek, we'll talk about Socket Labs, but very briefly from an India perspective, as a young entrepreneur that is building for India, what does sovereignty mean for you as a person?
So thanks so much and thanks for having me. Very similar to what Babak also said, that sovereignty can happen at enterprise level, where we look at our own data and then how we, what we want ultimately out of these AI systems. We just scale the effort to a national level, and that is how we look at sovereignty when it comes to India. So India also wants to be independent in terms of how we want to utilize our data, and not just utilize our data, but also what these LLM systems can do for India, right? So just to give you a gist of what sovereignty would mean, and I keep giving this example, that a friend of mine from the legal tech fine-tuned a llama model, and it was basically on some document in Indian law. When the inference happened, the model started hallucinating and started giving some hybrid laws which were Indian plus US. That was a very bad state for a domain like legal. So in this case, sovereignty would mean that having our own languages, having our own context, and having a freedom on how we want to ultimately utilize the data that is being generated through the inference process and through the application side of things that we are building using these large language models. So it's a combination. And just to take it a notch up, it's not just for the language model, and we were also discussing this, that India is taking an approach where the entire stack has to be sovereign. It starts from chips, then it goes to infra, then it goes to foundation models or large language models, then it also goes to systems that are auxiliary to how we work with LLMs, and then ultimately to applications. We have to look at the entire stack. Some of these things are difficult to build, like the chips and the foundation models, but India is definitely doing amazing at the application layer, and now we are putting a lot of effort down the stack, which is on chipsets and then obviously the foundation models.
So what is driving this push towards sovereignty? Is it just about, because AI is creating this enormous value, I should be sovereign? Is it about all the geopolitical challenges that have come out? What in your mind is driving this whole conversation on sovereignty?
Yes, yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of these things. I think geopolitically, where we stand today, people are able to see why sovereignty is important. Sovereignty has been important forever, but I think this is sort of like a new way of looking at it, because now we are literally in a chaos of a lot of geopolitical things. But beyond that, again, through an example. So we have multiple regulators in finance and then in legal. What's happening right now is that I was talking to one of them today itself. I had a meeting with them then, and they were telling me that they cannot actually use any of the US models from Google, from Anthropic, from OpenAI, because they fear that the data, which is very, very proprietary, has like a lot of PIIs, will ultimately be opened up to these entities. They cannot use APIs in such a case. And they cannot use the best of the best models that are coming out of China, because we obviously don't trust what these models have baked within and what kind of biases they have. So literally, as of now, they don't have an option. So the only way for them to be very much comfortable in leveraging AI is when India builds its own model, which ultimately gets deployed in an air-gapped kind of setup for many of these very high risk and compliance kind of industry. Defense is another very good industry. For national security, we cannot rely on any of these external models that are coming as of now. And there itself, India needs huge push in terms of building our own models, getting it deployed, not on a cloud, but on a setup which is sort of like secure in these kind of setups. And that is where I think we are moving now.
No, great points. Babak, if I can come to you, right? You as an individual have been a technologist. You've led and built distributed AI research, enterprise-grade platforms, IP, multi-agent architecture. But when you're looking at it from an enterprise perspective, right, how do you think about where should sovereignty, and you gave us the data example earlier, versus being an orchestrator of an ecosystem of suppliers, but still retain the control? Is that even possible?
Yes, I think it is. And I think it's important to note that we use these large language models behind agents and multi-agentic systems for their reasoning capabilities. And so if that reasoning, so there's one thing which is, data goes over the line, so it's a commercial model. But if it's not, if it's an open source model that you're hosting in-house that was, maybe it's DeepSeek or some other model, open weight, you're still subject to its reasoning. Hopefully you're not using it for its data, like what is retained in its world model, but you're using it for its reasoning. That reasoning and its language capability might not be appropriate for the use cases that you are looking for, simply because it's not tuned to, language is an obvious one, but also reasoning. We were talking just earlier, the capturing of culture, for example, is something that does impact the way a large language model makes choices in reasoning situations that have not been tested before. Part of the reason why we use these agents is because they are very good at recognizing contexts that they've never encountered before and making decisions there. So having them be aligned culturally on these choices also does make a sense. When it comes to an enterprise, it's important to make sure that the agents are granular enough, not too granular, because then you'll be paying too much and it'll be too slow, but granular enough to represent various different facets and aspects of your organization, your processing, your processes, and so forth. And that in and of itself gives you some level of independence and sovereignty. And again, the choices that you're making, these are micro-reasoning steps that sort of aggregate into how you're literally running your business autonomously or semi-autonomously. So it becomes very, very important to make sure that the reasoning is done in a manner that is appropriate, the language understanding is aligned with the way you expect the system to understand various different contexts. At the end of the day, the data and the commands within which these systems are running are what humans produce. And so if your user base is, grounded in a certain culture and in a certain sort of setting, you do want the agentic systems to be aligned with that.
And you see a lot of conversations around sovereignty from your context, or are you building out a sovereign practice within Cognizant? Is this more a country level debate, or is this something that you're seeing in the enterprise world?
Well, sovereignty in its actual term is more of a country-related thing, although the question does come up from clients when they seek sort of input from us as to the choice of large language model. And of course, the question back to them always is like, where are you using it? And for what purpose and what data is it going to be touching? So that question does come up. But I think the broader question of security, data security, and where that data ends up going, that is more universal for sure.
Yeah. Abhishek, if we can come back to you, right? You've trained models like Pragna 1B tailored to the Indian context. How do you assess the trade-off between using open source foundational capabilities that allow you democratize access, but controlling strategic use cases where sovereign outcomes matter, like the examples you gave for the regulators, the defense sector, maybe even healthcare there?
So I'm a big believer in open source. Again, I think if you are a software engineer, all of us have learned from open source. And it's also our responsibility to keep pushing the frontiers of open source itself. So that is one of the mission that we also have at Socket AI, that it's not just about one company having control over the models or even having understanding of how these models are built. Intelligence is for the society. So ultimately, whatever we build out, we have to push it towards open source. Not just the model weights, but also the recipes, the data sets, the code bases that we are building. It should be a widely known knowledge. And that is not just, there is a selfishness to it too, that India, when it comes to the core talent of building these models, we have never done it, right? And most of this is coming from the West or then from China, but we are learning literally from scratch. Though my team, every day we struggle to figure out what's broken, we fix it, we learn, and then there are infinite iteration that happens to train such foundation models. But then we don't want to keep it to ourselves. We want to open it for the community. That said, there are some aspects, like you mentioned, say for example, national security, and to some extent, as I was giving an example of the regulator too, some industries want very, very strong safeguarded models. In that particular case, obviously, we don't have a choice of open sourcing some of the aspects. So our strategy has been that we will create an open source foundation model, which will be trained on publicly available data sets. And then we're going to tune those models for sector-specific aspects. Defense, agriculture, healthcare, finance, legal, all these are aspects. We might not be open sourcing models that are, say, for example, built for defense. That's again coming from a strategy, and I think Indian government is also kind of like very supportive when it comes to not open sourcing these models, especially for defense-related aspects. But otherwise, I feel open source is the way. We should be working towards it.
So Babak, as a technologist, and I'm not putting you on the spot with Cognizant here, but as a technologist, how are you viewing open source AI and everything that's happening there?
I'm all for open source. I think it's the way to go. I think there's a lot to be said about many of these companies concentrating the know-how within sort of a firewall and not allowing that out. That's not good in the long term for the technologies, and just generally it doesn't help with trusting these systems. I think open source at a very extreme level helps with trust. And open source doesn't just mean open weight, it means the entire software stack that allows us to build these and train these systems, as well as the data sets that are being used for them. Even if we do open source at that level, we still have the issue of compute capacity. Like, something could be end-to-end open source, but just not, academia is not going to be able to make use of it because they simply don't have access to the processing capacity to be able to try these things out. In some ways, that is a blessing because it pushes them to go for more optimizations and making systems smaller, which is good. And it is happening when you look at, for example, what happened with DeepSeek and some of these models. They're much more capable, yet much smaller. But I think just generally open sources, we've actually been open sourcing our multi-agent accelerator, Apache 2.0 open source. It's out there for everyone to use, and we believe that's the way to go if you want to create something that is trusted and becomes a de facto standard.
Wonderful. I didn't know about that.
Just to add to that, I think it's also a strategy where, so DPI is a very good example in India, right? And what you were talking about on the trust factor, if say for example you build these open source systems in AI, that ultimately becomes part of the digital public infrastructure in India, that would also push the ecosystem to do more innovation on top of it. So it's sort of like a cycle where you push the frontiers, open source it, others will come, innovate on top of it, and then that will pump the industry to have like more innovation and then more money also coming into it.
This happened with software, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, software used to be very, very proprietary. And over time, open source took over simply because of that virtuous cycle of people like using it, enhancing it, improving it. It just has that built in. And I think we will hopefully transition to that too with AI.
And I think both of you seem very, very passionate about open source. I think that comes out very, very clearly. But if I was to shift focus to the whole theme about governance, right? Risk and governance, and especially for you, Babak, from an enterprise context, that's always one of the big issues to watch out for. So when you're working in this multi-agent architecture, you're using network compute from different sources, how do you determine sovereignty and, of course, manage your risks, et cetera?
Yeah, these systems are not deterministic, and measuring reliability is no longer about having unit tests that always test the same thing. So you have to test them semantically, and that's just on the test side. Then there are policies that you want to have in place from the ethics standpoint, guardrails that you want to have in place, and they hopefully you're moving towards more and more reasoning steps that are happening autonomously. So you can't stop these systems every step of the way and have a human rubber stamp the decision. That kind of defeats the whole purpose. So adding these guardrails is an engineering discipline that is emerging gradually out of necessity because, we need to be able to trust these systems. And we are using our most powerful tools for that, which is multi-agent systems. So what we advocate is, yes, empower your enterprise to be able to bring in third-party agents or create their own agents, but make sure that these agents go through steps where they are sandboxed, they're validated, and at the end of the day, they are registered centrally so that you can apply the guardrails and the policies and keep up to date with those policies and have multi-agent systems check and verify and apply guardrails to multi-agent systems as they're operating. That way you're really not interfering with them or only kind of raising the flag at points where you believe a decision might be breaking some sort of guardrail. So as you can tell, we're moving from these agentic systems and AI systems just being applied willy-nilly to coming up with an engineering and best practices sort of discipline around how they should be created so that they're reliable and safe and trustworthy. That's really what we're focused on the most.
There is no one framework to do all of this. You will have to put in the guardrails, the practices, the sandbox environment, and of course,
there's no panacea.
Evolve,
there's
right?
multiple, exactly.
There's no real one playbook that you can take. Abhishek, if I can come to you, right? You talked about India is building sovereignty across the stack, but I think if you look at the most critical one right now, which is compute, right? We are still, and cloud, right? We're still very, very dependent on global providers. So, for somebody who's a research-first startup, how do you think about sovereign compute models? And do you think, governments and private actors can co-invest without really disrupting this landscape?
Sure. So I'll talk about the bottlenecks as of now. So compute is definitely it. I would say it was a bigger bottleneck 2 years back. India has worked extensively since then to actually solve the compute problem. And the good strategy that India took was we never went outside to look for compute. India mandated that the compute should reside within India. And because of that, investments happened. A lot of GPUs were imported, super happy about that. And data centers got established here itself in Mumbai. And that cycle basically started. And now there is a lot of investment which is coming into the data center. So I'm hopeful that in the next 5 years, India would be one of the biggest hubs when it comes to data centers because that investment is definitely flowing in. Second bottleneck has always been, I think, data, especially working on Indic languages. Just to share a statistic, there's a very famous data set, MC4, multilingual C4. It hardly had like less than 1% Indic data representation. And that data was is meant by scrapping the entire internet. I think they also excluded a lot of Indic data set because back then Indic data was not even thought of being important. So that was sort of like excluded. But that's the state of data as of now, especially when you are building in Indic. And that we need to ultimately solve for. And we can't wait for humanity or us Indians to go on the internet and generate Indic content and then ultimately build out the foundation model. So we then have to put in a lot of effort to ultimately build out the data sets. We are working on it. I think through iterations, we will be able to solve this particular problem. Then the third bottleneck, which I feel to some extent still exists in the ecosystem, is that research-first companies should be looked at by VCs either internally or externally. So funding is still not coming to an extent which it should come in the ecosystem. And I think I think people over here should also think about it, especially if you are a VC or an investor, that India's GDP boost will happen now onwards through research and innovation. Gone is that time when we were relying on heavily on human resource. Now we are moving in an era where hardcore research can actually make money. And we first need to invest money into that hardcore research to ultimately reap benefit out of it. So I'm not just talking about AI, I'm generally saying that anything happening around R&D in India, people should come out, people should heavily invest because this is the time for India and we'll be shining in the R&D space in the next 5 years for sure.
So Babak, I know we're going to run out of time, but if I come back to you with that question, right? I mean, Abhishek talked about saying it's not just about human resources, but human resources with the right skills will power all of the sovereignty. So how are you thinking, and maybe your advice for companies, countries on how do you think about building that really deep talent capability that will be able to build these research-first startups that will give you strategic autonomy and many other such issues that we're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. I want to second what Abhishek just said. Very, very important. Investment in R&D, it always takes a back seat. It's always the first thing that kind of goes out the door in companies when they're like having issues. But when you look back, it's always been, with a lag, the source of differentiation, the source of margin, the source of real revenue. And same thing, I think, from a country perspective, investing in R&D. We're living in a world where the frequency at which these disruptive technologies are coming and hitting us is just mind-boggling. And so we as a company at Cognizant, we've been investing heavily in R&D. We've opened AI labs. We're actually hiring AI researchers and PhDs to push the boundaries on AI. There's a lot that can be done, and I think there's that. We talked about processing capacity as well. They go hand in hand. Like every student you talk to, every professor you talk to is complaining that they do not have access to processing capacity so they can actually try out these things themselves. I think these are two areas to look at. I think looking beyond just IT skills is important as well. Context, domain knowledge, paired with this democratized AI that is like a calculator now. You don't have to know Python to be able to use AI. I think also expanding, I think in India, there's this pride in the IT world, but I think it needs to expand beyond that. I think you'll do well to do that.
Thank you so much. I know we're out of time. Oh, we do have a minute or so. I was seeing it wrong. But are there any audience questions? I do have a last question, but if there's one question from the audience we could take. Okay. So maybe, just a closing question for both of you. If full sovereignty in technology a realistic goal in this whole, globally connected ecosystem, or strategic interdependence is the smarter frontier? Abhishek, if we can start for you. You come from the full strategic autonomy lens, right? So.
Yes, I feel strategic autonomy is the way forward. That said, I'm just thinking on it, maybe a hybrid of it, I guess. But okay, maybe it can be in phases. So as of now, the important aspect when it comes to India is that we definitely have to push some of the aspects, like especially in R&D forward. So strategic autonomy, narration is very good because that will help us push things forward. And then later on, we can actually decide on whether, once we have reached that stage, on how do we then ultimately flip it. Like just keeping my answer short.
Babak?
Well, as an international company, I must say I'm not a politician, but I would hope that focus on sovereignty actually enriches everybody's AI systems, like bringing in the multitude of languages and data that can come into, and the R&D and research and hopefully open source coming out of India can help the world. And at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're bringing AI to help humanity. So I'm hoping this does not silo into every country having their own system and not allowing anyone else to use it. And it's not. I mean, even China, we're seeing open source. And I mean, they've picked up the mantle of open source. We're seeing that here in India as well. I'm hoping that by focusing on what each country has to offer when it comes to AI, we can enrich AI as a whole for all of humanity.
And just last one point, I think India also stands in the middle where whatever we build out of India, say for example in AI, can actually be exported to the global south. So that was also the narration in the Impact Summit too, that other economies maybe don't have the scale of compute that India can build out. And we should be doing that. We should build in India and then also help out others in the entire global south to take the frontiers of AI forward. Yeah.
So build your capabilities, build the R&D, build innovation, but don't build walls, right? I think that's really
Exactly.
how I would like to summarize this discussion. Thank you so much, Babak. Thank you so much, Abhishek. And thank you so much for joining this session.
Thank you.
Thank you. And ma'am, if I could please request you to do the honors. Yes, can we please have our token of appreciation given to both our guests? Thank you so much, gentlemen.